and welcome to our next edition of Reclaiming My Mind. I'm your host, Jessica Vaughn, also the president of the Democratic Progressive Caucus of Tampa Bay. And today we have a Florida State Senate District 20 candidate, Kathy Lewis, with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I don't know that much about the state Senate, so I'm going to go ahead and use some questions from our state caucus application to kind of move around and navigate what you'd be doing in your seat on the Senate. But to start off, what I'd really like to do is just hear a little bit about your background so our listeners know about you, and then talk about what prompted you to run.
Okay, I'm Kathy Lewis. Thank you very much for having me. What happened was 2 days after I decided to run for office, I attended a class for how to run a campaign.
Oh, okay.
After I told my husband, I was going to do this.
Was that the one that the Hillsborough County Democrats?
Yes,
Okay, I went to that one too.
Maybe you were there. I don't know. But it was in December. And I got there, and the gentleman teaching the class went around the class and asked everyone what they were going to run for. When he got to me, I said Florida State Senate District 20. And he immediately told me how it was unwinnable, that I would make a fool out of myself and embarrass myself.
Oh.
He went on and on and on trying to discourage me from running. And I thought, this is my first introduction into politics. And I kind of like it because we debated the entire class.
Right.
Anyway, when I was driving home, I even called him again to talk some more about why he was so against me running. And he went on and on about some numbers and said he would call me back. But when I thought about it later, I said, this guy didn't know me.
Right.
He's talking about something unwinnable.
Sure.
I grew up in Baltimore. I'm from one of the worst places in the country, surrounded by drug use, gun violence, learned helplessness, unwinnable at every turn. Unwinnable at every turn. And that myth of unwinnability still exists in my life today.
Right.
We have a daughter with a disability. We face unwinnable challenges every day. And once she turned 18, she qualified for certain benefits, of which took me about 15 months to get these benefits. Once I got them, that's where everything stopped. The state didn't tell me when it would start, what it would be, how much it would happen. So one of the problems my daughter has is she doesn't sleep at night. So one night about 3:30 in the morning, she finally went to sleep. I wrote a letter to 75 different people explaining our case, starting with the Health and Human Services Secretary all the way down to the people in charge in Florida. It was Tom Price at the time, the Health and Human Services Secretary. He's since been fired. And at 9 a.m., they called me. 6 hours later, I was shocked and told me to call an administrator on disabilities at 10 a.m. in D.C., the person in charge of all of it in the country. I called her at 10 a.m. She answered, clearly was angry, said she spoke to the people in Florida and to call her back in 2 days if I didn't hear anything. That was a Thursday, and on Tuesday, my daughter's case was completely funded, ready to go.
Wow.
Now, that was great for us,
Sure.
but it made me incredibly angry. Is that what we have to do? Right to Washington, D.C., to get the people in our state to do their job.
Right.
And what about the people who don't think to do that?
Or don't have the resources,
don't have the resources.
time to spend that.
Exactly.
Right.
So I had been an advocate in the disability world for over 20 years. I told my husband it's now time for me to move in the policy-making, law-making arena. So that's how I ended up here.
Wow. So as far as your background then, tell me what you do for work and what your experience is or anything that you want to share about your background.
Yes. As I said, I grew up in one of the worst places in the country, Freddie Gray territory. And it was very difficult. I decided at a very young age that I was going to do the opposite of everyone around me. No drugs, no drinking, none of that. Just keep my head down, do my schoolwork. I did that, fought, and scratched my way out of the hood, so to speak, to Johns Hopkins, where I graduated from there. Met my husband. We'll be married 26 years tomorrow.
Congratulations.
My husband's a surgeon, and we have 2 daughters. Also, I have a daughter with a disability as well as an older daughter who also graduated from Johns Hopkins. And I like to tell people this story. My husband has a bachelor's, a master's, an MD, a PhD, and an MBA. 4 of those degrees are from Johns Hopkins. My daughter graduated from there. And even my daughter with the disability went to USF. Now, I tell people this story because their childhood is very different from mine. And in order to make that sort of leap, that quantum leap, it takes an incredible amount of focus, determination, and drive. And I want to use those skills that I have for all the people in Florida and Tallahassee. So that's one of the things I want to do and plan to do.
So are you employed now?
No, I'm also, prior to that, I was prior to getting my daughter her benefits, I was a writer. I have a series of books called My Life in My Pocket. Some of the books are in Baltimore City school systems. I have a series of preschool books for every grade class you can take in high school, from chemistry to physics to the numbers and alphabet, etc. And I even have a high school book and a book for prisoners. And those books teach people how to really think about your life and what it means and how you can really monitor your decision-making process. And that's sort of what I did as a child to get myself from where I was to where I am today. Prior to getting benefits for my daughter, which it became a full-time job, that's what I was doing. I was speaking at schools around the country, mostly underprivileged schools, areas like that, and even went back to my own middle school as well.
So would you say education is a passion of yours as well as writing?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love that you break some of the larger concepts down for preschoolers that you said you'd find in high school and middle school so that they can start to kind of prepare themselves for those concepts.
Yeah, I mean, you can teach your child at a young age Venn diagrams and H2O and things like that.
And at least be familiar with them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about kind of the skill set that you think prepare you for the seat. Is there anything else experience-wise or the characteristics that you mentioned that you feel specifically are a fit for this seat?
Yes. When I've heard the stories, I've talked to people who have been in the legislature of how there are a lot of sort of bullying tactics. It's quite dysfunctional. Lots of entrenched people there, been there for years. My incumbent hasn't been challenged in years. Tom Lee.
Tom Lee, okay.
And
Republican.
I believe, honestly, I believe when I get there, it will be all-out war to get things changed and right, so move towards helping our citizens of Florida. Because of my skill set of how I grew up, I am not intimidated by powerful people or powerful men.
Right.
I think it will take an incredible amount of drive, focus, force, and determination to pass laws that make sense for us, that will take care of the people of Florida.
Right.
And I think you basically need a warrior to do it because it will be very difficult.
Yes.
I know it will be. But difficult doesn't bother me.
You like challenges.
Yes. The impossible takes a little longer, but not much.
Okay. So, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and excuse us if we sound muted at all. We're both recovering from a cold. That's how dedicated to democracy we are. We're both here late in the evening, recovering from a cold, making sure we get our message out to as many voters as we can. But tell me a little bit about the district that you're running in, geographically, what it covers, and kind of what the voters look like.
Okay, Pasco County, District 20 is part of Pasco, Hillsborough, and Polk counties, Plant City area, down to Temple Terrace, pieces of Land O'Lakes and things like that.
So kind of North Tampa, North Tampa, North, okay.
And, we actually have the numbers as far as Democrats registered voters go. It's a little edge, yes, a little bit of an edge. I don't know the numbers exactly, so I don't want to quote them. But we have a little edge with registered voters. The problem is often we as Democrats don't vote, in particular this voting season, midterm elections.
Right.
And we're working on how to move that number as well as increasing new voters as well. So that's what we're working on with my team.
So what do you think this constituency, based on what you've encountered and, whether it's canvassing or talking to the voters, what issues do you feel like have come up over and over again in the district that you'd be representing? What are some of the issues that seem to be getting or not getting people to the polls?
I think it's either 45, I may have the number wrong, 45 or 46% of people in the state of Florida live at or below the poverty level. I think people don't believe they have a voice anymore because no one's there to listen. I think often when you're too busy trying to survive, something that I've been, involved in myself, you can't think beyond yourself. Because, in order to think about politics in the world at large, you sort of have to have some sort of security within yourself. So that is one of my number one issues is poverty. Poverty is man-made. It comes from oppression and taking land, basically. And my solution for my district is to start with people living below the poverty level. Some people that are really in trouble. And create a universal basic income for people that are really in trouble.
Yeah.
Studies have been shown that the mayor of Stockton, California is doing this. And studies have been shown that if we just give families $300 to $500 more a month, it will have a ripple effect everywhere. Crime goes down, health, ER visits go down. And the most important piece is school performance goes up. Because with that little bit of money, they can quit that third job or the second job, finally have the mental bandwidth to read to their children at night, spend more time with them, not being stressed. And it just improves everything.
Right.
So this is one of the things I want to work on. Now, and because it's such a large number, 46, 45% of us,
right,
it is important that we do this. It is now time to end poverty. And I have lived in poverty and moved out of it, and I know how to do it. I know what it feels like. So you need someone in the room to explain this to the powers that be and get them to understand the benefits of it.
I'm sorry. No.
There's a book called The Utopia for Realists.
Oh, okay.
And he talks a lot about the statistics of what I'm talking about. And I would love to have that person come speak to our Senate once I'm there and really get that going.
Yeah, because what I think the first question would be for listeners, regardless of whether they support that, and obviously I do, but how would you fund something like that? There are so many things that are already on the radar that are getting underfunded. So getting something kind of more revolutionary, even if it's aimed at people in poverty, I think the biggest pushback would be, where would that funding come from? So how do you envision that working?
I know exactly where it would come from. As I said, my daughter has a disability and she's on something called the Med Waiver, which is under Medicaid. By me being in the trenches of this, I see enormous fraud and waste and incompetent. I actually have a plan already written up, which I was going to work on prior to even deciding to run for office, of how to revamp this entire Med Waiver system, because it does not work. They sort of farm out the work to these service providers with no accountability, absolutely none, not in any real way.
Right.
We can funnel that money, use that money in a much better way.
So from what I'm hearing, you would want to kind of attack poverty by basically providing accountability and making sure that the programs that are funded are done so in the most proficient way, so that we're not wasting money, and then we'd have some extra money to fund these ideas.
And the other piece of that would be, we already have sort of Social Security and food stamp or SNAP programs in place. Waste is there. I mean, the amount of red tape you have to go through to get that, we would remove all that with a universal basic income. This is money you would simply give without any questions. And statistics show that most people go back to school, learn a trade, quit the other job, and are more relaxed with their children at home.
Sure.
And it makes the world much better for everyone.
So it almost sounds a little bit like socialism. And on that vein, what I'd really love to hear is, because this is definitely an issue that I feel like is near and dear to so many of just our listeners' hearts. Let's talk about universal health care then, because this would have a lot to do with kind of the basic human right of living above the poverty line or having access to health care. So I'm assuming, and maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, that you would then support universal health care, or how do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I think the time has come. That's another piece. As I said, my husband's a surgeon, and we talk about this a lot. Why is it that, we pay anyway, okay? If you don't have health insurance and you have a problem, you go through the ER, the most expensive way to even get care.
Right.
It's sometimes 10 times more the amount of money. If we can stop that, we pay anyway. They don't pay, but we pay through our taxes and through the write-offs through the hospitals,
Right.
et cetera. We pay anyway. So if we can get control of that, give people the health care they need, that would curtail those ER visits.
Right.
Also, it's the human thing to do.
Right.
And I think we can save money that way.
I agree. Tell me, because this was a question on the endorsement form, and I thought it was a good one, about the first piece of legislation you draft and introduce when elected.
Yeah, I would go back to my universal basic income. As I said, I would try to get a piece of funding to not necessarily cover everyone at that moment, but to begin in some of the, there's some parts in Pasco County where people actually live with dirt floors, things like that. They have these food droughts, nowhere to buy groceries or fresh produce.
Right.
So we'd start somewhere there, start relatively small, and then watch in 6 months let the data sell itself.
Right.
That's what I plan to do.
So in that vein, how can we create a more equitable tax structure? Because I think, kind of when we think about how we can fund some more of these social programs and social ideas on the national level, we always start to talk about the tax income inequality. So what would be some of your ideas as far as making the tax structure more equitable?
See, that's where we need a warrior in the Senate, because often the taxes, the way they set up the tax shelter is to help the wealthy. The wealthy tend to have big lobbyists, supporters to get them the votes that they need.
Right.
I've heard stories about our representatives having to wait till someone go to the bathroom to get an item on an agenda. These kinds of things have to stop.
Right.
So we simply have to show them the error of their ways through data, and also call out what programs or things that are harming our citizens, but are actually helping the big companies. Basically, we subsidize these companies by letting them pay low wages and not provide benefits.
Right.
Because we pay eventually when they go through the ER or in other ways. So that's a very hard piece there, because of the powerful lobbyists and the powerful people and all the money it's concerned.
Absolutely.
That's why you need someone like me who's unafraid and is willing to take it on and willing to call it out when it needs to be called out. And that's what I would do.
So in that vein, when we're talking about workers' rights, tell me a little bit about how you feel as far as raising minimum wage and supporting unions.
Well, we absolutely have to create a living wage. And, I almost cringe when I say it, because we've been talking about this for years.
Right.
The time has come, I believe. The time is now. We can no longer wait. And you hear this talk of this sort of trickle down. We have it wrong. We have to start, and I don't mean at the bottom, I don't mean to say that, but for lack of another word, at the foundation of our society, and lift up that way.
Right.
That, if you go from, I think everyone should have a minimum of $15 an hour.
Right.
Minimum. Households should at least be $25, $30 an hour. That way people are no longer starving.
Right.
Literally, or eating bad food. So we have to start from there and go up.
And what about workers' rights? Because it seems like what's really come out of Tallahassee in our state legislation, particularly in this last session, were attacks on unions and the right to organize. And I feel like in general, that's on the national level. I've been talking to some local workers. Like we had a plumber in here the other week, and I started talking to him about unions. And because of his age and his experience, and he had worked for a good employer, he understood that unions were important at one time, but he didn't see the benefit in them now. And he didn't really understand the history of how unions are the reason that we have a minimum wage or an 8-hour workday. And so I think that the younger people don't necessarily have the history of what unions have done for workers' rights. And so it's easy to attack them. So tell me about how you would or wouldn't be able to kind of support workers' rights if you were, in the state legislation.
Well, I think, for instance, a gentleman like that saying that, you hear that often. I hear it going to have to go back to people are actually suffering.
Right.
I mean, if things were going well, I don't think you would have any question about joining a union because it comes down to the fees and dues generally.
Right.
And you feel like that little bit of money, you need it in your own household. You need it to take care of your family. And then you don't begin to see the benefits of the union because you are stuck in trying to survive. Once we move that survival mode with helping people, because even beyond the universal basic income, I think it's like most people who file for bankruptcy only need about $500 more a month to get them out of their trouble. It's not a lot of money. So if we can get people with the right wages and let them understand and see the power of collective bargaining, because here again, we have this sort of powerful structure of a legislator. It's probably a 80-20, 20% of the people really are running things, while 80% are doing the work. We have to really, we can't change it unless we collectively bargain in some way with the wages and things like that. So
I would say you're strong supporter of unions.
Absolutely.
So another subject that's specifically important to me and seems to be under attack in the legislation, the two pieces that really have made me feel unbelievably alarmed, although this entire last session was alarming, were obviously the advancement of charter schools and the defunding of public schools. So if you don't mind, tell me a little bit, especially since it sounds like education is a passion of yours, about how we can change that and what the priority of funding public schools should be and how you feel about charter schools.
Well, the funding of public schools should be the number one priority. Charter schools, you know, as a parent of a child with a disability, so I have a little bit different sort of point of view. It can be tough because a lot of times, if you have a child with a disability, the school can say they can no longer serve your child. Then where do you go? Generally, these parents go to the charter schools often. But on the other hand, we can't keep robbing that money from our public schools to fund these charter schools. So I guess the quick answer is I would love to be in a meeting and learn a little bit more about what that funding is, how that is developed, and then go from there from a disability standpoint. Now, beyond disabilities, charter schools should not be funded. Shouldn't be taking money from the public schools to fund them. Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about that one.
Right. So I guess what that would make me curious about is, should we then make sure that while we're funding public schools, we're also broadening the services that are available for all different, all different abilities or all different learning styles, or because it seems like, one of the issues is that, schools are not even funded for, the more typical students. And then when you have students who have atypical needs or any sort of challenges or disabilities or children with disability, then they're just not equipped to handle it. So,
absolutely.
So it sounds like, a lot of parents, they feel like their only choice are charter schools.
That's right.
But what I would hope is that we would be pushing to make sure that public schools are able and have the resources that they need to really be able to reach and handle and accommodate all of our students.
Absolutely. An ideal world would be that our public schools would be able to take care of everyone. And that child with a disability should be able to attend his or her neighborhood school just like anyone else.
Sure.
That often is not the case because of funding, because of the lack of experience. And I don't know the history of charter schools here necessarily, but I would venture to guess that they grew out of this problem. Started there with children with disabilities, etc.
I think they definitely started with inadequate public school funding.
Exactly.
And once they did that, parents felt that they had no other choice. So once they started offering private schools, which they're publicly funded, but they're privately managed by a board who can turn down or have any, their own discrepancy. I definitely feel like it's been engineered this way on purpose. And that's one of my biggest concerns is people feel like they have no other choices, whether it's because of, income or their neighborhood schools or, their specific students' needs. So it's something that concerns me a lot. But since we're
I think the charter schools, that whole, I think it's a bit out of control as well with how they're opening them and the way they go about getting them funded.
Yeah.
It's out of control. So it needs to be reined in and looked at carefully. And we have to just continue to fund our public school education. I mean, 46 cents per student or whatever it was is ridiculous. One of my other things is I strongly believe that we have to end these end of grade testing. That's a very strong point of view I have. I don't know exactly what it costs. I'm sure millions of dollars to administer these tests that suck the fun out of going to school, suck the fun out of teaching. And we need to take that money and pay our teachers and let them continue to do the wonderful job that they do.
Yeah.
No other entity needs to come in and test to make sure they're at some level.
Right.
That is the teacher's job. That's where it should be, and that money should go to them.
Absolutely, and they're not a good indicator of a student's ability.
Absolutely
anyway.
Not. Their biases and all kinds. I could go on and on about that. So,
so since we're talking about education, one of the things I thought was interesting that we have on one of our endorsement forms is talking about school to prison pipelines, and what a problem that is, especially in lower income or Title I schools. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on ending the school to prison pipeline.
Well, from what I understand, prisons plan their building of prisons based on third grade reading levels.
Really?
Yes. So they look at the third grade reading levels of various schools.
Wow.
And that's how they determine to build a prison in 10 years, because that child will be 17, 18, 19 years old and likely going to prison. I mean, statistically, it shows that it's just like you said, a pipeline.
Right.
What we have, and that, I must say, is appalling. What we must do is use that data for something more positive. If you can look at that and see that if a child's third grade reading level is below, they're some percentage likely to go to prison, we can use that data in a more positive way. Put more funding in early childhood education. That's the number one place they like to go to cut things. Here again, it's because their parents who are overwhelmed with little kids. I mean, we can't go and lobby. We're too busy taking care of our children. And also, I think in the long term, that will extend to diminishing these sort of school shootings, because we have to really start in utero, basically, and help families. So if we fund this in a different way, in a better way, also use books like what I talked about, the books I write. That was the whole purpose of my books, is to start them young and help them grow with their decision making. I think we can eliminate this sort of pipeline to prison. Also, there are biases in the way we teach our children, in particular minorities, the way we view minorities, in particular African American males. It's appalling. We need to have training for our teachers, administrators, everyone, to get this under control.
And what about the prison lobbyists?
Oh, yeah. But, well, you have to get, the way to get rid of that, you have to take the profit out of prisons.
Right.
I mean, they're for-profit institutions that rely heavily on the data. And when you look at that third grade reading level and you look at how they're measuring how they're going to build multi-million-dollar buildings, and they are betting on it. There's a lot of truth in that.
Right.
And then you have to look at the underlining thing of that. How is it all tied in? I mean, I can't wait to get to the legislature to see how this prison money is somewhere tied in with the school money and how it all runs together.
Exactly.
And is awful.
Connect the dots.
That's how I imagine.
You have to connect the dots.
Yes.
So let's cover some other topics that I think people will be interested in real quickly. I noticed here that you said that you support decriminalizing marijuana. And I know that that's a hot topic for a lot of our listeners, regardless of what partisan they are legalizing medical marijuana or marijuana meeting for the Progressive Caucus had the largest attendance of any of our meetings. Over 100 people came. So it seems to definitely be something that's on the forefront of a lot of voters. Tell me what your stance on that is.
We have to completely decriminalize it. And I believe that anyone in prison for drug use should be released.
Awesome.
And given help, not prison. Marijuana has a lot of benefits for people, especially people with chronic debilitating diseases.
Right.
Now, there's also an issue which I've recently learned that, even though the states may legalize it even medically, there's some issue with the companies that form. They can't put their money in a federal bank because the federal law isn't there yet.
Right.
So that's something we definitely have to work on to get it a clean and clear decriminalization, because we're not quite there yet. I mean, the states are still fighting with the government and how to do that. But yeah, it has to be completely
decriminalized.
Yes. Yes.
How about, I know that in the environment is a topic, and I saw here we had some questions that you did support a ban on fracking, and some especially with like the waters in South Florida, our natural waters are contaminated and green, and because of Rick Scott's deregulation, our natural resources are being destroyed. So tell me a little bit about kind of your stance on the environment, and specifically, I saw here you answered something about offshore drilling for other forms of petroleum and natural gas extraction. What is your stances on that?
We live in the Sunshine State. Now, it's appalling that we don't use solar energy in a better way.
Right.
Yeah, I know there are issues with that as well. But for now, that's much more clean, and I'm sure eventually we'll get to even improve that.
Right.
That is what we should do. We cannot drill anymore. We simply cannot. We cannot do any fracking anymore. We simply cannot. And the one thing that I will work on immediately when I get there is we have to stop freely giving out plastic bags that takes thousands of years to decompose.
Right.
My oldest daughter lives in San Francisco. Every time she comes here, she's appalled that they just give you these bags.
Right.
What we have to do is charge 25 cents per bag if you need it. That will bring awareness and ultimately eliminate them. That's a quick and easy fix, and we can use that money, the 25 cents, to improve our environment. That's something that I would work on now. That's part of my 4 things that I will work on as soon as I got there.
Oh.
And everything else has to be eliminated. We have to move towards, we have cars that are electric now. We have to really take that on and save our planet. And we already have the ability to do it.
Right.
It's the lobbying, it's the oil companies, it's all that. But the time has come.
All right. So now I want to kind of move to one that's specifically troubling, especially with what's happened recently in Pinellas with the shooting, and just this awful stand your ground bill or law, which from anything that I've seen, and I've done some research, is really just, and people push back when I use this, but a Jim Crow era law of, allowing people to claim that they feel threatened, specifically usually by African Americans, and kill them. So tell me about how you feel in general, or what is in your platform about arming teachers and gun rights, and then specifically more about the Stand Your Ground law.
Okay, with Stand Your Ground, because it has to be completely abolished. It's exactly what you said. It is licensed to kill Black people. It probably stems from the 50s anyway. I'm not sure how long it's been around, but I'm sure it extends from slavery up through Jim Crow, and it just gives you the ability to shoot minorities, basically. So that has to be completely eliminated. As a person who has grown up surrounded by gun violence, I have to speak a little bit about this.
Okay.
Every day when I was a child and a teenager, every time you leave the house, you're worried about a stray bullet hitting you or flying through the house. I have a cousin shot by a stray bullet in her chest, miraculously survived.
Oh.
Another cousin's 4-year-old child shot in the head by a stray bullet, miraculously survived.
Wow.
My 14-year-old friend's head was blown off by a shotgun accidentally. And my own mother was shot by a stray bullet, miraculously survived. She'll be 85.
Goodness.
She's 85.
Wow.
So I have a lot of experience with gun violence.
Yes.
And one of the things that I am horrified by is that students go to school with the same fears I had 40 years ago.
Right.
Only it's happening in places not necessarily stricken with poverty. Now, people push back when I say this, but nothing was done 40 years ago because it was with African Americans in the hood, in the city,
Right.
and it was just a normal part of my life. So having been in an active shooter situation often, my views on that are a little bit different. So that's why I like to explain that.
Sure.
This is what I think we should do as far, well, stand your ground has to go. Okay.
Right.
But this, as far as protecting our children in school, we have to tax the ammunition heavily. I would like to see a clip cost $2,000 or something like that to bring some value in it, to make people think 2 or 3 times about using all their bullets. So we have to tax them. We have to use that money to fortify our schools. This is the world we live in now, unfortunately. It was my world 40 years ago, but now it's spread to other places. But this is the world we live in. I believe that if we use that funding from taxing these bullets to fortify our schools, whatever way. I've seen videos of sort of these panic rooms we can put children in that are bulletproof. Also, I believe, and people push back when I say that, we should have an officer. Teachers should not be armed at all, but we should have an officer at every school. This is the world we live in. And the reason why I say that, I've been in an active shooter situation. And what you're thinking is anyone going to come and help us? That's what you're thinking.
Right.
What are you going to do? And the only way to stop an active shooter is with a gun, preferably an assault rifle, because that's more than likely what they would have. So my view is we have to, people used to shoot up courthouses. That doesn't happen anymore. Why? Because they did exactly. Well, but they did something about it. Now, we might necessarily don't have to have metal detectors, but we have to do something about it.
I think one of the things that I hear is the biggest concern about that is that it enforces the school to prison pipeline. That once you start to fortify the schools, that then it reinforces kind of the environment of more of a school to prison pipeline, and that these should be, less scary, fortified, to use your own word, environments, and that it becomes a contradiction of a learning environment when you have armed officers or panic rooms or drills. So I think it is a complicated discussion, but I just wanted to...
And that's why I always preface it with my own experience.
Sure.
Because if I had been fortunate enough to not grow up around gun violence, I'd have a more altruistic view. Guns shouldn't be in schools, etc.
Yeah.
But that's not my experience, and I know what it feels like.
Right.
And you're looking for someone to help. And I'm not saying they have to be armed guards everywhere in school, but there should be somebody assigned to a region or something, because waiting 2 to 3 minutes for the police to get there.
Right.
See, it's all great until a shooter's there. Once he's there, you should have been fortified. I mean, that's sort of 2020, but as I said, my experience would make me have a different answer likely, but that's
no, and I'm glad that
is the way I feel about it.
glad that you are feel confident enough to share that, because some people just cater their answers to what they think is popular and what people want to hear. So it's nice to hear that,
now,
you're using
I can get in a room and people got better ideas. I'm ready to hear them.
I like that
we
too.
can't sit around any longer and wait for the next shooting.
Right. So another thing I wanted to touch on, and this is something that's just my own personal question, how you feel about the separation of church and state at the state level.
Well, it has to be completely separate. Okay. And even with me, I'll just tell you outright, because I was just at the Democratic Black Caucus Forum, and I got a question, not quite this question, but the lady asked about what my viewpoint was on gay marriage, which is sort of that.
Sure.
Basically, that we got to separate, but basically that. And I believe in gay marriage, absolutely. I believe everyone should have equal rights. Same thing with abortion, because, if we make abortions illegal, the only thing that does, wealthy people will get safe abortions. Poor people will die.
Sure.
That is it. Now, whatever your religious beliefs, I'm talking about life and death situations here because people become desperate and this is what happens.
Sure.
So we have to keep, I am completely pro-choice. We have to keep that. I am completely for gay marriage. We have to keep that. It was far too late coming. And we have to keep that. And we have to take that even beyond to make sure that people in that community are getting health care, and all kinds of crazy stuff is still going on, very similar to what happened to the African Americans in Jim Crow. A lot of that is still going on in that community. So aside from what I personally believe from a religious standpoint, that is completely separate. These are my views, and these are the things I will fight for. Period.
Okay. And I agree. And what's interesting to me is, for so many people who are pro-life, and this just boggles me, why we're fighting and having a discussion about abortion instead of talking about stopping unwanted pregnancies. To me, the fact that we're having conversations about what to do once an unwanted pregnancy happens, if you're really that concerned about babies' lives or, protecting children, what we should be talking about then, if you're pro-life, is access to birth control and health education, sex education, and starting at the front line. So we're not even getting to the point where we're talking about what to do with unwanted pregnancy. We're making sure we support people who aren't ready to have children and that they have access to the things they need to stop unwanted pregnancy. So it's interesting to me that pro-life advocates are not addressing that side of the argument.
Well, the religion bleeds into those areas you're talking about with contraception and things like that. So the waters are so muddy.
Right.
So it just looks that way. I mean, I can't speak for a pro-lifer because I'm not one. But, I mean, sin is sin. And when we cherry pick, well, you're gay, but I'm divorced and somehow my divorce is okay.
Right.
I mean, there are no degrees outside of the 10 Commandments. I mean, if we want to talk about religion.
Right.
So it gets real silly, in my opinion. And besides, whatever my sins are is between me and God, not between me and you. So it should be totally separate anyway. But humans tend to want to judge each other, and we have issues with that. So
no, I appreciate you saying
that.
Right. Well, I think that covers a lot of the questions that I have, and we're getting close to being out of time, unfortunately. But I'd love to give you an opportunity to tell me anything that I haven't covered that's at the center of your platform, and then kind of talk about the election and what that's going to look like and how people can support you.
Well, I'll just do a quick review of the sort of my main issues.
Your pillars.
My pillars. I want to eliminate fraud in the Medicaid, med waiver world. I know exactly where that is and how to do it. I've already created a plan to do that. End poverty. And we'll start with a small part of our district. And I know the numbers will warrant out any other additional growth we will need there. Create a living wage, the $15 an hour minimum. I mean, really, to rent an apartment in Tampa, you really need $19 an hour. But we'll start with 15 and see if we can work from there. And we have to end of grade testing and use that money, those millions of dollars, to pay our teachers fairly and let them continue to do the great job that they do. They know what our students need and how to teach them. They are the teachers. And there's so many biases and things in testing, standardized testing anyway. And then the plastic bags have to go immediately. And if you want one, you have to pay for one.
Right.
And if you start having to pay for one, eventually they will eliminate themselves. So those are the things I will work on as soon as I get there. The other thing I wanted to go back and talk just a little bit about the sort of dysfunctional state that this legislature is in when you're trying to get things done.
Right.
One of the quotes, I can't remember who said it, I think it was Buckminster Fuller, is the longer and harder we fight the establishment, the sooner they make you a member. And I have done this many times with, advocating, and I'm advocating, and the next thing I know, they're asking me to be on the board. And I'm like, really? You want me to be on your board? And I'm fighting you. So it does work. And once I become a member from the pushing and fighting, I will begin to show them the error of their ways. The time has come to, for lack of a better word, call these legislators out when they make these ridiculous bills like 46 cents per student increase and some horrible gun law after the last shooting.
Right.
Someone in the room has to be speaking. I'm not saying they're not, but they don't have my voice, which is very strong and very determined. So, and please, you can find me on Kathy4Florida.com. Thank you.
Okay, so that's your website. Are you hosting any canvassing events or any phone banks?
Yes.
Are you looking for volunteers?
Yes, I'm looking for volunteers. You can find that information on my website as well. We'll have a massive canvassing the weekend before August 28th, so the 26th and 27th. We'll be canvassing heavily that weekend. I am canvassing each weekend as well up to that point. I have several speaking engagements, 2 and 3 a day. From now until then.
It's fun being a candidate.
It is. I'm made for it. I really am. So, I've been doing it, but just not politically.
Right.
I've been an advocate for people in the disability world for years. So that's what we're doing.
So you'll be on the August ballot because you have a primary challenge.
Yes.
You have another Democrat in the race. So
Yes.
you'll be on the primary.
Absolutely.
And then go on to the November
6th is the general election.
if you win the primary.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that you're taking fundraising on there. And if people wanted to contact you, should they just go through your website, or is there an email?
They can come through my website. My email is Kathy@Kathy4Florida, and you can call me. I love phone calls. I talk to people all the time. 813-981-3697. Call me anytime. I'm happy to talk to you.
I love when candidates give their phone number out on the air. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure we could talk forever. It has been such a pleasure having you on. I appreciate every candidate that trucks it out here to have conversations with us. Good luck in your race.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Again, if you ever have any feedback regarding our show, you can always email Vaughn, V as in Victor, AUGHN, and the number 30 @gmail.com with questions or feedback. And thank you again for listening. And I hope you tune into the next episode of Reclaiming My Mind. Thanks and have a nice evening.